Rain had just begun to fall when the black sedan pulled up outside St. Aldan Medical Center. The hospital stood like a polished monument in the middle of the city, glass walls, spotless entrances, and a reputation built on excellence. Inside, everything moved with precision. Doctors rushed through hallways, nurses adjusted schedules, and administrators kept one eye on the clock and the other on the waiting room. It was a place where titles mattered, and that was exactly why her arrival caused so much confusion. She stepped out of the car carrying only a slim leather case and a folded umbrella. She looked nothing like the specialists the hospital usually welcomed. No assistant followed behind her. No security escort cleared the path. No dramatic introduction announced her presence. She wore a simple navy coat over professional clothes, her hair tied neatly at the back, and her expression was calm. Almost too calm for someone entering one of the busiest trauma hospitals in the country. At the front desk, she gave her name quietly and handed over an identification folder. The receptionist skimmed through it, frowned, then looked up again. "You're here for the surgical review board?" "That's correct." The receptionist hesitated. I was expecting someone else." She gave a small, understanding smile. "That happens often." Within minutes, word spread through the executive floor that the outside consultant had arrived. By the time she was escorted to the conference room, half the senior staff had already formed opinions. She noticed it immediately. The subtle glances, the raised brows, the silence that followed her as she entered. At the far end of the long table stood Chief Surgeon Dr. Rowan Vance. He was known for his brilliance, and for a personality that made even experienced doctors nervous. Tall, sharp-featured, and always dressed as if he were preparing for a televised interview, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned long enough to feel uncomfortable. He turned as she entered. For a second, he simply stared. Then he looked down at the file in his hand. Then back at her. "You're the consultant?" "Yes." A pause. Dr. Vance gave a short laugh. "I was informed we'd be receiving a senior international specialist." She met his gaze evenly. "You are." A few people around the room shifted awkwardly. He motioned toward a chair but didn't sit. "Please, before we begin, perhaps you'd like to explain these credentials." He lifted the folder and flipped through it with visible skepticism. Several certificates from overseas institutions, research appointments, advisory roles in medical crisis teams, specialized trauma certifications few in the room had ever seen before. But one detail stood out. Many of them were tied to programs outside traditional hospital systems. That was enough for him. "These are unusual. They are specialized. They're unconventional. They reflect the work I've done." His expression hardened slightly. "And yet I see no permanent post at any major domestic hospital." She folded her hands calmly. "My assignments have not always been within standard hospital structures." That answer only fueled his doubt. Dr. Vance leaned back and spoke louder, making sure the room heard him. "So let me understand this. We are expected to trust a consultant whose career history reads more like classified paperwork than medicine." A few uneasy laughs followed. She remained still. "I understand the concern." "Do you?" he asked sharply. "Because from where I stand, these credentials look like a collection of temporary titles and niche certifications designed to impress people who don't ask enough questions." The room went silent. One of the younger surgeons lowered his eyes. A nurse standing near the wall visibly tensed. Still, she said nothing. Dr. Vance took her silence as weakness. "I've spent 30 years in surgical leadership," he said. "I know the difference between substance and decoration." He placed the file on the table. "And frankly, I'm not convinced." Her eyes moved briefly to the folder, then back to him. "You're entitled to your opinion." That answer irritated him more than any argument could have. He expected defensiveness, excuses, some attempt to prove herself. Instead, she sat with quiet certainty, as if she had no need to convince anyone. That confidence unsettled him. The meeting began, but the tension never left. She was there to review emergency response protocols and provide recommendations on advanced trauma readiness, an assignment requested by external agencies after a recent national audit. But every time she offered insight, Dr. Vance challenged it. Every suggestion was met with skepticism. Every observation was dissected. At one point, she calmly pointed out a flaw in the hospital's triage escalation model, one that could delay intervention during high-pressure cases. Dr. Vance dismissed it immediately. Our system has been in place for years. Then years is how long the weakness has existed. The sentence landed harder than anyone expected. A silence followed. For the first time, a few staff members exchanged looks. Because she was right. Even those who disliked her presence could see it. But Dr. Vance only smiled coldly. Confidence is easy when you're speaking in theory. She replied without raising her voice. It stops being theory when lives depend on it. That was the moment the room shifted. Not completely, but enough. People began listening more carefully. And Dr. Vance noticed. By midday, whispers had started across departments. No one could quite place her. No one knew where she had really worked. But the way she spoke under pressure, the way she analyzed systems, the way she carried herself, it did not match someone unqualified. Still, the chief surgeon refused to reconsider. In his mind, expertise came through established pathways, recognized institutions, clear titles, predictable careers. She fit none of those, which made her dangerous to his assumptions. That afternoon, as the hospital moved into peak operating hours, she stepped out onto the observation deck overlooking the emergency wing. Rain streaked across the glass. Below, ambulances came and went. A young nurse approached quietly. She had been in the conference room earlier. She looked hesitant. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. The specialist turned. For what? For how they treated you. A small smile. You're not responsible for other people's behavior. The nurse nodded but stayed. Still, it wasn't right. There was sincerity in her voice. The specialist studied her for a moment. You noticed more than most. The nurse gave a nervous laugh. I notice everything. Comes with the job. A pause. Then she lowered her voice. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you defend yourself? The specialist looked back through the glass. Because people determined to underestimate you rarely change their minds through words. Then how? She answered softly. Time. The nurse thought about that, then asked the question everyone had been wondering. Where did you really work? For the first time, the specialist hesitated. Then she gave the same calm smile. In places where titles mattered less than outcomes. It was not a full answer, but it was enough to deepen the mystery. Before the nurse could ask more, alarms suddenly sounded through the lower floors. A sharp announcement echoed overhead. Code Delta. Emergency response team to trauma intake. Both women turned instantly. The nurse's face changed. That's not routine. Together, they moved toward the elevators. Down below, chaos was already building. A high-priority patient had just arrived under extraordinary circumstances. Security had sealed part of the intake area. Medical teams were rushing into position. And for the first time that day, even Dr. Rowan Vance looked uncertain. The specialist stepped into the edge of the crowd, observing. No panic, just focus. She studied the movement, the communication gaps, the rushed decisions. Then her eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. Not with the patient, with the response. A flaw in execution. Exactly the kind she had warned about hours earlier. She took one step forward. And in that moment, she saw it before anyone else did. The one critical detail everyone had missed. Her voice cut through the noise. Clear. Precise. Stop. You're preparing for the wrong intervention. The room froze. Heads turned. And Dr. Vance's eyes locked onto hers. For one breathless second, no one moved. Then the patient monitor gave a sudden alert. And everything changed. The sharp tone of the patient monitor sliced through the trauma bay like a warning no one could ignore. For a split second, every movement in the room stalled. Then everything accelerated. Doctors rushed to stabilize the incoming patient while nurses adjusted lines and checked vitals. Security personnel remained posted at the doors, creating a wall between the trauma area and the rest of the emergency wing. The atmosphere felt different from any ordinary emergency. Too tense, too controlled, and too secretive. The specialist stood near the edge of the room, eyes fixed on the patient. She had only seen a few seconds of the intake setup, but it was enough. The team had prepared for internal bleeding based on the field report, but the symptoms did not fully match. The breathing pattern, the skin tone, the delayed pupil response, something pointed elsewhere. She stepped closer. Dr. Rowan Vance immediately blocked her path. "You've done enough interrupting for one day." She kept her voice steady. "If you proceed with the current protocol, you'll lose critical time. We are following standard emergency procedure." "That's the problem." His jaw tightened. Around them, the staff pretended not to listen while listening to every word. The patient's blood pressure dropped again. A nurse called out the numbers. Dr. Vance turned back toward the bed. "Prep for emergency abdominal imaging." The specialist's eyes stayed on the patient's hands. Cold fingertips. Slight muscle rigidity. Not consistent. She spoke louder this time. "It's neurological." Several heads turned. Dr. Vance snapped back toward her. "You are not in charge here." "No," she replied. "But if I'm right, your current treatment will delay the one thing that matters." A young resident hesitated. "Sir, should we at least rule it out?" That question alone shifted the energy in the room. Dr. Vance glared at the resident, then back at her. "You're basing this on observation?" "I'm basing it on pattern recognition." He gave a bitter laugh. "Pattern recognition?" She stepped forward, closer now. "The field report says the patient became disoriented before collapse. That is not consistent with abdominal trauma alone. The muscle tension suggests central nervous system involvement, and the oxygen saturation decline is too rapid for isolated internal injury." The resident looked stunned. The charge nurse checked the chart again. Dr. Vance crossed his arms. "And your conclusion?" She answered without hesitation. "Toxic exposure or induced neurological disruption. Either way, you need immediate cranial assessment, not abdominal priority." Silence. Then another alarm. The patient's pulse became erratic. The nurse at the bedside looked directly at Dr. Vance. "Sir." For the first time that day, uncertainty crossed his face. He hated it, but he hated the possibility of being wrong even more. "Fine," he said sharply. "Run the neurological scan. Now." The team moved fast. Within minutes, the imaging confirmed what she had seen. There was no internal bleeding. Instead, there was acute swelling in the brainstem region, triggered by a rare toxic agent that mimicked symptoms of multiple trauma conditions. The room went still. One of the attending physicians whispered, "How did she know?" No one answered. Dr. Vance stared at the results, his expression unreadable. The specialist did not react. She simply moved toward the treatment board. "You need targeted anti-inflammatory intervention and rapid detox support. There's a 12-minute window before irreversible damage begins." The attending physician turned to Dr. Vance for approval. This time, he did not speak immediately. Every eye in the room waited. Then, with visible reluctance, he nodded. "Do it." The treatment began. Orders were carried out exactly as she instructed. And within minutes, the patient's vitals began to stabilize. The pulse steadied. Oxygen levels improved. The pressure eased. A quiet sense of disbelief spread through the trauma bay, because everyone understood what had just happened. The woman whose credentials had been mocked only hours earlier had identified a life-threatening condition faster than the entire senior trauma team, and she had done it with almost no information. The young nurse from earlier stood near the supply cart, unable to look away. She watched the specialist carefully. There was no celebration in her face, no sign of triumph, only calm concentration, as if saving someone under impossible circumstances was simply another part of the day. Once the patient was secure, the room slowly released its tension. Staff stepped back. Machines continued their steady rhythm. Dr. Vance removed his gloves and looked toward her. You made your point. She turned to him. This was never about making a point. For a moment he said nothing. Then he glanced toward the chart. The toxic profile. It's uncommon. Yes. You've seen it before? Her pause was brief, but noticeable. More than once. That answer raised more questions than it answered. Before anyone could ask, a senior administrator hurried into the room. His face was pale. There's an issue. Dr. Vance frowned. What now? The administrator lowered his voice, but not enough to prevent nearby staff from hearing. The patient's transport team is demanding updates. They're refusing to identify themselves fully. The specialist's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Recognition. Where are they? Private conference area on level 2. She looked toward Dr. Vance. I need to speak with them. He stepped in front of her. Absolutely not. This is still my hospital. And your hospital is now connected to something far beyond a medical emergency. His voice sharpened. You don't get to issue orders here. She held his gaze. I'm not issuing one. I'm giving you a chance to avoid a larger problem. That sentence unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Before he could respond, the charge nurse approached with new lab data. Doctor, the toxic agent isn't in our database. Dr. Vance took the file. His face darkened. Impossible. It was synthesized. The specialist spoke quietly. Every person nearby turned. She continued. Not commercial. Not naturally occurring. Designed. The room seemed to shrink. Designed for what? The nurse asked. She looked at the patient through the glass. To be difficult to detect. No one spoke, because everyone understood what that meant. This had not been an accident. Dr. Vance finally lowered the chart. Who is this patient? The specialist answered carefully. Someone whose identity matters more than you realize. He stared at her, and for the first time, there was no sarcasm in his voice. Then tell me the truth. She met his gaze. I can't. Not yet. That only deepened the tension. But before he could press further, footsteps echoed from the corridor. Fast. Coordinated. Deliberate. Everyone turned toward the trauma bay entrance. Several individuals in dark suits moved into view. Not hospital staff. Not local authorities. And their presence immediately changed the air in the room. They carried themselves with controlled urgency. The lead official scanned the room once, then focused directly on her. His voice was low but firm. We've been trying to reach you. The specialist stepped forward. I was occupied. We have a developing situation. Dr. Vance moved between them. This is a restricted medical area. You can't just walk in here. The lead official looked at him only briefly, then reached inside his coat and presented identification. Dr. Vance's face shifted. Not because of what was shown, but because of what it implied. The room fell into silence. The young nurse felt her heart race. She could not see the badge clearly, but she saw enough. And she saw Dr. Vance step back. Just slightly. The official turned to the specialist. We need you immediately. Her eyes moved toward the patient. He's stable for now. That window may not last. She took a breath, then looked toward the medical team. Monitor for secondary inflammation. If symptoms recur, adjust dosage by 15%. Do not wait for approval. The attending physician nodded instantly. No one questioned her now, not after what they had witnessed. As she prepared to leave, Dr. Vance spoke. His voice quieter than before. Who are you? She stopped. For a second, it seemed she might answer. Instead, she simply said, someone you should have listened to sooner. Then she walked toward the waiting officials. And as the doors closed behind her, the entire trauma unit stood in stunned silence, realizing that the mystery surrounding her had only just begun. The hospital corridor remained silent long after she disappeared behind the closing doors. No one in the trauma unit moved for several seconds. Machines continued their steady beeping, nurses returned to tasks, and doctors checked charts. But the energy had changed. The woman they had dismissed as an outsider had just been addressed by unidentified officials, as if her presence was critical to something far beyond medicine. And now she was gone. Dr. Rowan Vance stood near the entrance, staring at the hallway as if the answers might return with her. But nothing did. Only the quiet reality that his assumptions had been wrong. The young nurse finally spoke. "Sir, should we continue monitoring at the adjusted dosage?" Dr. Vance blinked, as if pulled back into the room. "Yes, follow her instructions exactly." The words tasted unfamiliar, yet he said them without resistance, because he no longer had reason to doubt her. Not after what she had done. The patient remained stable, but tension lingered. The toxic profile still made no sense. No agency had yet identified the source, and every minute without clarity deepened the mystery. Upstairs, in a secure conference room that had once hosted donor meetings and executive briefings, she stood by the window while the officials reviewed updates. The lead agent placed a tablet on the table. "We intercepted new communications an hour ago." She glanced at the screen. Encrypted transfers, travel coordinates, emergency routing patterns. Her expression hardened. "How far along?" "Further than expected." "And containment?" "Compromised." That answer brought silence. She turned away from the screen. "What about the second carrier?" "No confirmed location." She closed her eyes briefly. The lead agent studied her. "You're the only one who has handled this profile before." She opened her eyes again. "That was under entirely different conditions." "Maybe. But the medical side is evolving faster than our analysts predicted." Another official stepped forward. "The patient downstairs was supposed to be our warning." Her jaw tightened. Instead, he became a casualty. The room went quiet. No one corrected her. Because she was right. The lead agent lowered his voice. "We need your help identifying exposure pathways before this spreads." She looked toward the hallway. "I'm already helping." He hesitated. "Not from inside a hospital." That sentence carried more weight than the others, because they all understood what he meant. Her work here had been temporary. A cover assignment. A strategic placement tied to broader concerns. And now the situation had changed. She had been drawn back into something she had spent years trying to leave behind. Downstairs, rumors spread through every floor. No one knew exactly who the officials were, but staff talked in hushed voices. Some claimed they were intelligence officers. Others believed the patient was a diplomat. A few whispered that the hospital had become part of a classified operation. No one had proof, only fragments. But in institutions like St. Alden, fragments were enough to fuel entire narratives. Dr. Vance ignored the gossip. He had locked himself in his office with her credential file spread across his desk. For the first time, he read every line carefully. Every institution, every certification, every advisory role. And now, with the context of what he had witnessed, the details looked different. Programs linked to humanitarian medical responses. Field surgery initiatives in unstable regions. Emergency bioresponse teams. Consulting roles with agencies he had previously overlooked because they did not fit traditional systems. He realized something uncomfortable. Her career had not lacked structure. It had simply followed a path he did not understand. And because he did not understand it, he dismissed it. That realization sat heavily. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The young nurse stepped inside. "Sir." He looked up. "What is it?" "The patient is asking for her." Dr. Vance frowned. "He's conscious." "Barely. But he keeps repeating one phrase." "What phrase?" She hesitated. "Find the doctor before the second signal." A chill moved through him. "What does that mean?" "I don't know." He stood immediately. When they reached the recovery area, the patient's eyes were half open, unfocused. His breathing remained shallow. Yet the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Dr. Vance stepped closer. "Can you hear me?" The patient turned weakly. "Where is she?" "She's unavailable." "No," he whispered. "She has to know." His hand gripped the blanket. "The signal, if they trigger it, His voice broke. Then, with sudden clarity, he looked straight at Dr. Vance. "Do not let them move her." Before another word could follow, alarms on the monitor surged. The medical team rushed in. Sedation levels had destabilized. Within moments, the patient slipped back into unconsciousness. Dr. Vance stepped away, unsettled. Because the fear in that man's eyes had not been ordinary. It had been the fear of someone carrying knowledge too dangerous to lose. And somehow it all circled back to her. Hours passed. The officials remained upstairs. Hospital leadership demanded explanations but received none. Every request for disclosure was denied under federal authority. By evening, the storm outside had intensified. Rain hammered against the windows as the specialist finally exited the conference room. She looked tired for the first time that day. Not physically, emotionally, as if old burdens had resurfaced. She walked toward the elevator but stopped when she saw Dr. Vance waiting. He stood alone in the corridor. No arrogance, no sharp remarks, just a man carrying the weight of his earlier judgment. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he handed her the file. "I read everything." She took it silently. "I was wrong." She looked at him. There was no defense in his voice. Only honesty. "I judged you because your path didn't look like mine," he said. "And I mistook unfamiliarity for weakness." She studied him for a long moment, then asked softly, "Why tell me this now?" "Because I needed to say it before events move beyond this building." That answer surprised even him. She held his gaze, and for the first time her expression softened. Most people don't apologize until it benefits them. This doesn't. A faint smile touched her face. "No, it doesn't." He hesitated. "Can you tell me what's happening?" She looked down the corridor, then back at him. "What I can tell you is this. Today was not random. The patient. A warning. And the toxin? A message." He felt the floor shift beneath him. "From who?" She shook her head. "Not yet." That was when footsteps approached. The lead agent appeared again, urgency in every movement. "We have confirmation." Her posture changed instantly. "What kind?" "The second carrier has been identified." "Location." He handed her a secure device. She read the screen once, then looked up sharply. "That's impossible." "It's real." Dr. Vance stepped closer. "What is it?" She turned toward him, and for the first time she spoke with complete seriousness. "The next phase begins here." He stared. "At this hospital?" She nodded. "Which means every person inside is now at risk if containment fails." The words struck hard. Before he could respond, she moved into action. "Lock down access points. Restrict all non-essential movement. No one leaves without screening." Dr. Vance didn't hesitate. He turned to alert staff, but stopped when she called after him. "Rowan." He looked back, startled by the use of his first name. "If I ask you to trust me completely, can you?" For 1 second, the question held everything between them. Then he answered, "Yes." She gave one short nod. "Then do exactly what I say next." And as thunder rolled across the city, St. Alden Medical Center became something far more than a hospital. It became the center of a crisis no one inside had ever imagined. The moment she gave the order, the entire atmosphere inside St. Alden Medical Center shifted. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it was immediate. The kind of change that did not come from alarms or announcements, but from people realizing at the same time that normal no longer applied. Dr. Rowan Vance moved first. He stepped out of the corridor and activated the internal alert system from the nearest station. "Security Protocol Delta is now active," he said firmly into the intercom. "All non-essential movement is suspended. All departments follow controlled access procedures immediately." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then the confirmation tone sounded. It was done. Staff across the hospital froze as the message echoed through speakers. Some looked confused. Some looked alarmed. But most recognized one thing. This level of protocol was never used for routine emergencies. Down the hallway, the specialist was already moving. The lead agent walked beside her, speaking quietly. Internal teams are positioning now. We've secured the West Wing exits. Good, she replied. But that won't be enough if we don't isolate the signal source. Dr. Vance caught up with them. Explain to me what I'm dealing with, he said, struggling to keep pace with their urgency. She did not slow down. You're dealing with a coordinated medical interference pattern, she said. Not an outbreak, not an accident. That's not a medical term. It is in my world. He frowned but stayed silent. They entered a restricted operations room near the administrative wing. Screens lined the walls, showing live feeds from different hospital zones. Security teams were moving into position. Doors were locking automatically. Nurses were being redirected. Patients were being shifted into secure observation areas. Everything looked controlled, but she was not reassured. Her eyes scanned every screen carefully. The lead agent stepped beside her. We've confirmed a second exposure vector. It's embedded in a supply chain transfer. Her expression tightened. Inside the hospital? Yes. Dr. Vance looked at the screen. That's impossible. All our incoming supplies are screened. Not at that level, she said. He turned toward her. Then what are we missing? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered. The adaptation window. The room went quiet. Even the agents stopped typing. Dr. Vance narrowed his eyes. Explain. She pointed toward one of the monitors. The first case was not meant to succeed. It was meant to test response timing. Your hospital adapted quickly. That triggered the second phase. The lead agent confirmed it quietly. She's right. The pattern matches escalation modeling. Dr. Vance felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. So the patient downstairs was bait? She shook her head. Not bait. A trigger. The word felt heavier. She continued. Once a system responds predictably, it becomes possible to map it. Once it's mapped, it can be influenced. And now? He asked. She met his gaze. Now someone knows exactly how this hospital reacts under pressure. A silence followed. Only the sound of distant footsteps and muted alarms filled the room. Dr. Vance rubbed his forehead briefly. And the second carrier? The lead agent answered. In transit through internal service routes. Likely already inside a controlled area. That changed everything. Dr. Vance looked at the screens again. If that reaches patients, it won't behave like the first case, she said quickly. It's been adjusted. The nurse who had been following quietly spoke for the first time. Adjusted how? The specialist turned toward her. To spread faster under stress conditions. The room felt colder after that sentence. Dr. Vance exhaled slowly. So what do we do? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked closer to the central console and studied the layout of the hospital. Every hallway, every junction, every access point. Then she pointed. We isolate the central supply corridor. If it moves through there, it reaches 3 departments within minutes. The lead agent nodded. I'll redirect teams. Dr. Vance stepped forward. You're treating this like a containment breach. It is a containment breach, she replied. But this is a hospital, he said. We can't shut down critical care routes. Her voice softened slightly. I know. That honesty surprised him. For a moment the tension eased. Just slightly. Then a new alert sounded. One of the monitors flashed red. A technician rushed in. Sir, we have movement in the East Service Corridor. Unidentified personnel. The lead agent moved instantly. Show me. The screen shifted. Figures in standard hospital uniforms were seen moving quickly through restricted access doors. But something was off. Their movement patterns were too coordinated, too efficient, too deliberate. Dr. Vance stepped closer. That's not our staff. The specialist's expression sharpened. They're using internal clearance tokens. The lead agent swore quietly under his breath. How did they get those? She answered without looking away from the screen. They didn't get them. They replicated them. That statement changed the urgency in the room. Dr. Vance turned sharply. That's not possible without internal access. She finally looked at him. Which means someone inside your system is compromised. A heavy silence followed. The young nurse swallowed nervously. Someone here? No one answered directly, because no one wanted to think about it. The lead agent stepped back toward communications. Lock all internal authentication systems. I want manual verification for every access point. Dr. Vance immediately began issuing orders to hospital staff. Meanwhile, she stayed focused on the screen, watching patterns, tracing movement, calculating timing. Then she spoke again. They're heading toward pediatric intake. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Dr. Vance didn't wait. He moved immediately toward the exit. I'm going there. She stopped him. Not alone. He hesitated. She met his eyes. If they've chosen that route, they expect disruption. He understood what she meant, and for the first time he did not argue. Instead, he nodded. They moved together. Down the corridor, alarms had now increased. Security teams were redirecting staff. Patients were being moved carefully but quickly. The hospital was still functioning, but barely. Every step felt like walking through a system under strain. As they reached the pediatric wing, the atmosphere changed. Quieter. More fragile. The kind of silence that made every sound feel louder. A nurse met them at the entrance. There are children inside being monitored, she said quickly. We've moved most critical cases to secure rooms. The specialist nodded. Good. Keep them there. Dr. Vance looked at her. And if the intruders reach this floor? She didn't hesitate. Then we make sure they don't reach the patients. That statement carried weight. But it was not spoken like a threat. It was spoken like a responsibility. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the corridor. Footsteps. Fast. Coordinated. The lead agent appeared behind them. They've breached the east corridor. Dr. Vance turned. How many? 3 confirmed. Possibly more. The specialist stepped forward slightly. Non-aggressive unless interrupted. Dr. Vance frowned. That doesn't sound reassuring. It means they are prioritizing completion over confrontation. That explanation made it worse. Because it meant they were not here to fight. They were here for something specific. Something precise. Something that required them to move through a hospital without causing disruption unless necessary. Which meant they knew exactly what they were doing. The group moved quickly into position near the junction of the pediatric ward. The specialist signaled for silence. Everyone obeyed. Footsteps grew closer. Dr. Vance could feel his pulse in his ears. Not fear. Focus. A kind of controlled tension he was not used to sharing with anyone else. Then, just as the figures appeared at the far end of the corridor, she stepped forward slightly. Her voice was calm. Stop. The figures paused. No weapons were visible. Just medical uniforms. But their posture confirmed everything. They were not hospital staff. One of them spoke quietly. We are not here for interference. The specialist replied. Then state your objective. A pause. Then the answer came. Recovery of transferred sample integrity. Dr. Vance frowned. What sample? But she already knew. Her expression changed slightly. Not surprise. Confirmation. The lead agent moved closer. Where is it now? The figure responded. Already in motion. That meant they were too late to stop initial transfer. But not too late to stop completion. The specialist turned to Dr. Vance. This is what I meant. He understood now. This was not a single event. It was a sequence. And they were inside it. She looked down the corridor. Then spoke softly. We don't have much time. Dr. Vance nodded once. Tell me what to do. That was the first time he said it without hesitation. And she heard it. Not as submission, but as trust. And in that moment, as distant alarms echoed through the hospital once again, the next phase of the crisis quietly began to unfold around them. The corridor outside the pediatric wing felt tighter than before. Not physically, but in the way people stood, moved, and breathed. Every sound seemed sharper. Every second felt measured. Dr. Rowan Vance stayed close behind the specialist as they positioned themselves near the junction. The lead agent moved slightly ahead, speaking into a secured device in short, controlled updates. All access points were being monitored now. Every non-essential staff member had been redirected. Yet the sense of control was fragile, because somewhere inside the hospital something was still moving, and no one could fully see it. The specialist stood still for a moment, listening, not to the alarms, not to the voices, but to the rhythm of the hospital itself. Then she spoke quietly. "They're trying to complete the cycle." Dr. Vance looked at her. "What cycle?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to the wall monitor and studied the layout again. Her eyes tracked movement patterns, corridor intersections, and response delays. Then she pointed. "This is not random movement. It's structured. Every step they take is designed to create pressure points." The lead agent frowned. Pressure points. Yes, areas where response slows down, where decision-making becomes fragmented. Dr. Vance crossed his arms. "So they're testing us again." "No," she said softly. "They're finishing what they started." That silence hit harder than anything else, because it suggested the situation was already deeper than anyone had realized. Down the hall, a distant door alarm triggered. A sharp tone echoed. Then another. The lead agent raised his head instantly. "They've entered the lower pediatric service corridor." Dr. Vance didn't wait. He moved forward immediately. The specialist followed, her pace steady but focused. Behind them, nurses began securing rooms. Staff guided patients into protected areas. The hospital was still functioning, but now it was running on urgency instead of structure. As they turned the corner, they saw movement at the far end of the corridor. 3 figures, still wearing hospital attire, still moving with calm precision. But their presence no longer blended in. They stopped when they saw the group. No aggression, no panic, only observation. The specialist stepped forward first. "You're out of time," she said quietly. One of the figures responded. "We are not here for confrontation." "Then why are you here?" Dr. Vance asked. Pause followed. Then the answer came. "To prevent completion failure." The words made no immediate sense to him, but she understood. Her expression tightened slightly. "Completion failure means the sample has already been altered." One of the figures nodded. "Yes." Dr. Vance looked between them. "What sample are you talking about?" The lead agent stepped closer. "Answer clearly." The figure finally spoke. "Neurological adaptation compound. Prototype stage. High-risk response model." A heavy silence followed. Even Dr. Vance, with all his experience, did not recognize the full implications immediately. But the specialist did. Her eyes lowered briefly. Then she said it clearly. "This was never meant to reach a hospital." The figure replied. "It was never meant to be inside a human response system at all." That sentence changed everything. Dr. Vance's expression hardened. "So this is experimental?" "Yes." "And the patient downstairs?" "A trigger host." The words hit like a blunt impact. The young nurse, who had stayed close behind, spoke quietly. "So he was used?" "No," the specialist interrupted gently. "He was exposed." There was a difference. Critical one. But it didn't make it easier. Dr. Vance ran a hand through his hair, struggling to process it. "So what happens now?" The lead agent answered. "If the second phase completes, we lose containment mapping entirely." The specialist nodded. "And then every hospital system that mirrors this structure becomes vulnerable." That statement made the situation expand in everyone's mind. It was no longer just St. Alden. It was something that could spread beyond it. Dr. Vance looked down the corridor. "We stop it here." The specialist turned toward him. "That is the goal." A brief silence followed. Then one of the figures spoke again. "You cannot stop it without access to the relay source." Dr. Vance frowned. "Where is it?" The figure hesitated, then answered. "Inside your supply verification hub." That location was not just another room. It was one of the most secure areas in the hospital. the central point where all incoming materials were verified and distributed. If compromised, it would explain everything. The specialist immediately turned. "We need to move." The lead agent stepped forward. "We'll secure the corridor." Dr. Vance nodded once. "I'll go with you." She glanced at him briefly. "You don't have to." "I know." A pause. Then he added, "But I understand the system better than anyone outside your group. If there's internal interference, I can identify it faster." That earned a quiet nod from her. "Then stay close." They moved quickly. The hospital around them felt different now. No longer chaotic. Not calm either. It was structured tension, like a system holding itself together under pressure. As they approached the supply verification hub, security doors were already in lockdown mode. The lead agent spoke through comms. "Manual override required." A technician responded remotely. "Authorization confirmed." The doors unlocked slowly. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Rows of monitoring stations lined the walls. Data streams flowed across screens. But something was off. Several terminals were still active despite lockdown protocol. Dr. Vance noticed immediately. These shouldn't be running. The specialist moved toward one of the consoles. Her expression changed slightly. "This isn't hospital input." The lead agent stepped in. "Show me." She pointed. "These commands are external. They're feeding into your internal system through a mirrored channel." Dr. Vance looked closer. "This means someone bypassed physical access." "Yes." A technician rushed in behind them. "We just detected unauthorized synchronization attempts." The room felt tighter. The specialist turned quickly. "How many nodes?" "3 confirmed." Dr. Vance exhaled slowly. "So this is coordinated." The specialist nodded. It always was. That realization hung in the air. Because coordination meant intent. And intent meant planning. The lead agent spoke urgently. "We need to isolate all 3 nodes." She already was moving. "No," she said. "We isolate the central anchor first." Dr. Vance looked at her. "And where is that?" She pointed to a specific terminal. "That one." The room fell silent. The technician hesitated. "That's a master interface. It controls cross-department logistics." "Exactly," she said. Dr. Vance stepped closer. "If we shut it down, we disrupt hospital operations." "Yes. Patients could be affected." She met his gaze. "Patients are already at risk if we don't." That truth was unavoidable. The lead agent made the decision. "Proceed." Dr. Vance placed his hand on the terminal.